Welcome everyone to the launch of our Track 1.5 Policy Dialogue report on trafficking and cyber-enabled crime. My name is Brian Eiler. I'm going to be chairing this session. We're waiting for participants to populate the room, so please give us a few minutes before we begin. And if you're just joining us, welcome. My name is Brian Eiler. I'm director of the Stimson Center Southeast Asia program. I'm happy to chair this public launch of our Track 1.5 Policy Dialogue report. We will begin in about 1 minute when folks have populated the room. But welcome to this launch of the U.S. Department of State's Mekong-US Partnership Track 1.5 Policy Dialogue summary report on trafficking and cyber-enabled crime. This report, which my colleague Courtney Weatherby will drop the link into the chat, is hot off the press, and it covers what I would call the most pressing issues facing the region right now. In May, the Stimson Center and IUCN gathered about 60 participants in this Track 1.5 dialogue. Track 1.5 dialogue means that we had participants from government and non-government organizations, and actually the organizations that are very impactful in this space, institutions that are very impactful in this space, to talk about how to combat and mitigate the effects of trafficking and cyber-enabled crime. And with trafficking, we discussed human trafficking, narcotics trafficking, and wildlife trafficking, which we learned, which has always been an issue in the Mekong region, but we learned, particularly through the pandemic, the flows of these illicit forms of goods and human trafficking increased significantly, and it caused many new challenges for governments and actors working to stem these flows in the region. And more importantly, I think, and I say more importantly because it's become such a pressing issue, there was much focus during the discourse of the conference on cyber-enabled crime and scam compounds that are still developing, and kidnapping and victimizing tens of thousands of people, particularly in countries like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, forcing them to use their smartphones and other means to scam money out of people around the world. This is an issue that unfortunately isn't getting enough attention, even though there was a New York Times front page article about it yesterday. Much more needs to be done. And we're going to learn about these issues today from participants in our two-day dialogue, those who came with us to Bangkok and had a very frank and open discussion, and also learn about the governance challenges related to these issues, and kind of give an assessment as whether governments currently have the toolbox in place to handle these issues, or are they moving in the right direction? I think that if you read this report, and I encourage you to do so, you'll see that there are numerous policy recommendations and recommendations for non-government organizations and researchers and other stakeholders to take to combat and stem trafficking in various forms, as well as cyber-enabled crime. The policy recommendations that you will read in the report came out as a result of participatory and consultative processes that these 60 participants kind of put their heads together to create during the two-day conference. And IUCN and the Stimson Center were very happy to lead that process. And I think we came up with some very impactful policy recommendations. And these recommendations are important because we see them kind of trickle up through the decision-making process within the U.S. government, as well as other donor governments, national governments in the Mekong and interventions and programmatic actions that come out of those non-government actors working in this space. One final thing I want to say, I want to give a big thank you to the State Department for support on our Track 1.5 policy dialogue program, but particularly on this thematic topic. The State Department and the U.S. government really came together and showed that they are prioritizing this issue set with representatives from numerous State Department bureaus, including INL, and we're going to hear from Dan Carroll from INL very soon, from the East Asia Pacific Bureau, but also the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DOD, and USAID were all present to demonstrate the commitment as well as join that discussion and discourse of the conference to come up with these policy recommendations. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. And it's a pleasure to invite Mr. Dan Carroll, who is the Acting Asia Division Chief with the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, INL, at the U.S. Department of State to deliver our first keynote speech. Thank you, Dan, for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian, for the opportunity to address this group today. So it's my pleasure to join everyone to kick off the report launch for the Mekong-US Partnership Track 1.5 Policy Dialogue on countering trafficking and cyber-enabled crime. Excuse me. Before we get started, though, into the specifics of the report, I'd kind of like to pull out the lens a little bit and talk about the partnership. As you all know, in 2020, the United States and the 5 lower Mekong countries upgraded our longstanding partnership formally into the Mekong-US Partnership. This partnership promotes the stability, peace, prosperity, and sustainable development of the Mekong subregion through cooperation between the Mekong region countries and the United States in addressing these transnational and transboundary challenges we're going to discuss today. A key aspect of this mission includes expanding cooperation on non-traditional security issues, such as countering transnational crimes. So the United States is strongly committed to deepening its partnership across the Mekong subregion, including through enhanced law enforcement and criminal justice cooperation. This addresses a range of transnational criminal threats, from human trafficking, trafficking of illicit narcotics and their precursor chemicals, to natural resource crimes, money laundering, and cybercrime. The question we often have to answer here is, why does the U.S. government care about trafficking and cyber-enabled crime in the Mekong region? It's pretty simple. The devastating consequences of these crimes and the illicit revenue they generate, doesn't know geographic, economic, social, or ethnic boundaries. Whether it's cyber scam operations, methamphetamine trafficking, human trafficking, or wildlife trafficking, all of our countries are affected. And the transnational criminal organizations behind these threats utilize the billions of dollars of illicit revenue to fuel corruption, criminality, and instability across the world. The United States provides ongoing training, technical assistance, and other support to a range of partners across the region to combat these shared threats. We will continue to do so in coordination with the other key partners, and will incorporate the recommendations identified in the Track 1.5 dialogue into our collective efforts. To talk specifically about this report identifies key recommendations from each session, and I'd like to draw your attention to a few priority recommendations that were outlined in the summary of the report. On wildlife trafficking, the participants recommended that efforts to reduce demand must tackle and respond to the traditional beliefs that drive local demand for wildlife projects. This includes addressing long-held cultural beliefs, such as the use of traditional medicine, religious beliefs, health curriculum, addressing alternatives to traditional medicine, and the importance of conserving wildlife. This is an often overlooked topic in efforts to combat the wildlife trade, and one that we plan to explore further. However, we will need help from NGOs and the subject matter experts to help determine where to focus and how to get the message right. On tackling cyber scam operations and human trafficking, participants recommended that international law enforcement agencies provide training on forced criminality and non-punishment principles to law enforcement and criminal justice agencies across the Mekong region. As we seek to address this complex crisis, a major challenge is that law enforcement in the region may often treat victims rescued from scam operations as criminals. While they may be forced to commit criminal acts during their captivity, they are doing so under the threat of violence or torture, which should offer them protections from prosecution. Practically speaking, The victims are often the best source of information and intelligence for law enforcement to take down the organizations that perpetuate these crimes. With respect to drug trafficking in the region, participants recommended that financial intelligence units and prosecutors should build capacity to conduct financial investigations and to follow the money. This part is critical, not just for the drug trafficking cases, but for all criminal cases, as the proceeds of the crime are linked to the predicate offense. Following the money can help take down the larger transnational criminal organizations rather than focusing on just the low-level offenders. Finally, as we seek to tackle the complexities of criminality linked to special economic zones or SEZs in the region, participants recommended a focus on increasing capacity and resources for local authorities to combat all forms of trafficking and aid victims of human trafficking in the SEZs. So whether it's cyber scam operations and associated human trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering, or other types of criminality, the dynamics of the SEZs make combating these crimes uniquely challenging. This is a particularly sensitive issue as the balance between attracting economic investment and tightening controls can lead to competing interests in the SEZs. We need to work together to identify and close these loopholes that corrupt actors are exploiting and help empower the Mekong countries to achieve the full potential that the SEZs offer. These are just a few of the great recommendations in the report, but there is no simple single solution that will solve these complex challenges. It will require commitment and collective action from governments, NGOs, the private sector, academics, media, and others who can help draw attention to these threats, to provide key information to decision makers, and to build capacity for agencies that need it. The United States remains a committed partner in tackling these crimes. We are examining different methods to address the issue of forced criminality and cyber scam operations in particular, including through targeted programming and identifying areas of need in the Mekong subregion. I'd also like to highlight that we have a participant with us today, Mek Dara, who was recognized as a tip report hero in the State Department's Trafficking in Persons report this year for his journalism on human trafficking and cyber scams in Cambodia. So I wish you much success and congratulate all of you for your efforts to find solutions to strengthen the region's security. Thank you for allowing us to address the group, and good luck with today's conference.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for those opening remarks. I'm glad you pointed out the issue of those who are forced into scam compounds or forced into criminality often are still treated as criminals after they are freed or they escape from these compounds. I think that was one of the biggest takeaways I learned at the conference, and that sometimes these victims are sent to prison as soon as they escape because there's not a regulatory framework or legal framework to properly address their situation, to understand their position as victims. Sometimes they escape across borders and they're accused of illegal immigration and detained for those purposes. There's a lot that the region needs to come to grips with in order to address this, and also see the victims as kind of a willing participant in enforcement as well, and understanding investigation and understanding the problem better so that their experiences can be used to come up with fast and rapid responses to enforcement and shutting these operations down. So thank you so much for joining us. We're now going to shift to Kun Anjali Dongkao, who's joining us from Bangkok. Thank you for joining us, Kun Anjali. Kun Anjali Dongkao is the Director of Border Security and Neighboring Countries Affairs Division within the Office of National Security Council of Thailand. And she's going to provide us with her opening remarks. Kun Anjali, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Arias, Director at the Simpson Center, representative of Mekong member and partnership and partner, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be here, and I would like to thank you all for attending the Mekong-US Partnership Track 1.5 Policy Dialogue on Countering Trafficking and Cyber-Enabled Crime. I would like to express my gratitude to the Simpson Center and the International Union for Conservation of Nature, who have done an excellent job catering representative of all the Mekong-US Partnership to attend the Mekong-US Partnership TAC 1.5 Policy Dialogue on countering trafficking and cyber-enabled crime. We have convened here today to provide an overview of the summary reports for the 6th policy dialogue conducted in Bangkok in May 2023, addressing one of the most pressing issues confronting our sub-region: water management, combating human trafficking, wildlife, narcotic, and cybercrime. The challenges related to trafficking and cyber-enabled crime on the region. First, cross-border issue. For years, Mekong region has been a center of global interest politically and economically. Countries are competing to achieve inter-regional and intra-regional seamless and integrated community for security and economic advance. The Mekong region fortifies everything from agriculture and fishing to energy production and manufacturing, and its nature resource provide huge economic value. However, the transnational organized crime syndicate have moved into the Golden Triangle, increasing the production and transport of illegal drugs from sites across the Mekong region and laundering their profits through the regional casino industry. These cross-border issues are being shifted by using digital technology. It is undeniable that for the past 3 years, the cyber technology has been exported by criminals. For example, cyber channel to steal or distort information, cybercrime as a service, online illegal trade includes armed sexual exploitation, fraud, online gambling, and so forth. Secondly, side effects of misuse of cyber technology. Threats from the use of cyber technology have indisputably become a significant challenge in maybe accept. The posts are serious threats in the security and well-being of our people, international peace and security. These cyber-enabled crimes are complex and multifaceted problems which are required and comprehensive measures are coordinated response. The Thai government has seen the value of Mekong region for our cooperation in economic development and cross-border issues, especially in case of misusing cyber technology. Thailand has implemented various policies and strategies to combat illegal trafficking and cybercrime, such as the National Policy and Plan on National Security 2023-2028. The National Security Council has worked in collaboration with stakeholders and mutual agencies to develop protective strategies to prevent and address emerging security issues that range significantly within the Mekong region. In the Mekong region, illegal trafficking and cybercrime has posed high concern agenda within regional and from international awareness. The Mekong-US Partnership is committed to addressing this issue through cooperation and collaboration. By working together, we can ensure that our citizens are safe from the circle of illegal trafficking and cybercrime. We can also empower our community to take protective steps to prevent our people from the unlawful action. I would like to encourage our policymakers, experts, and practitioners from across the Mekong sub-region and the United States to share insight, and experience. The platform, which exploits a wide range of issues, include the link between trafficking and cyber-enabled crime, the role of technology, this crime, and the challenge of investigating and prosecuting them. I envision the future of the Mekong-US partnership as a cooperation that emphasizes on how the summary unity is a burden resource and address security issue in an efficient and balanced manner. On behalf of the Thai government, it is important to note that Thailand will operate regular with Mekong region members, especially combating with illegal trafficking. International cooperation with strategic partner is ensure Thailand has taken steps to collaborate with other countries and organizations to implement effective strategies to develop appropriate measures to counter an emerging issue. Thus, this partnership, the Mekong-US partnership, TAG 1.5 policy that dialogue is at the cusp of turning a new dawn and a new day for the one of most advancing sub-regional cooperation. Lastly, I would like to thank you all our participants for their valuable contribution, and I look forward to the productive and encouraging dialogue. Let us work together to develop innovative and effective approach to countering trafficking and cyber-enabled crime, and to build a safer, more secure, and more purpose future for our people. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kunansali, and thanks for joining us from Bangkok. You mentioned a new day, and we have to acknowledge that it's also a new day for Thailand's embracing and prioritization of countering these issues, given the new government. And we hope that you continue to work with the new government to more deeply prioritize and combat. I'm glad that you mentioned the casinos and the casino in the Golden Triangle. Our team, Courtney Rutherby, the CEO of the Stimson Center, Brian Finley, Regan Kwan, and others from the Stimson Center were across the river from King's Romans Casino just a month ago, less than a month ago. And we saw how that is just a burgeoning space for the kind of illicit activity that we're talking about now. I first visited the region when there was nothing there, and now there are more tall buildings and probably more electricity consumption and other forms of consumption, and definitely the highest levels of illicit flows happening in all of Laos within that space of the King's Romans Casino. That special economic zone got a lot of attention during our policy dialogue. We learned of many things that the Lao government and Lao enforcement agencies have a lot of trouble accessing and gaining entrance into that special economic zone for enforcement activities, even though that is on sovereign Lao territory. So I just wanted to point out that there was much discussion about the King's Romans Casino and other similar special economic zones within the region. Thank you again for joining us. We're going to move to our panel discussion now. And for our panel, those of you tuning in, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions to our four panelists at the end of their four presentations and discussions. Please drop your questions into the Q&A box within the Zoom chat on the ribbon at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to address questions to a particular participant or speaker or to all of them, and I will help field those as we go. So we've invited some champions of our policy dialogue, champions who are working in this space to share some of their, not necessarily impressions of the dialogue, but we want to learn about what they're doing, what their organizations are doing in this space, and what more should be done to combat trafficking and cyber-enabled crime within the region. First, we're going to hear from Valentina Kasuli, who is a real standout at the policy dialogue. She's the project officer at the Humanity Research Consultancy. She's joining us from Brighton, England. Valentina Kasuli has research and professional experience in human trafficking, modern slavery, labor rights, supply chains, and policy analysis and recommendations. Her recent work is focused on human trafficking and slavery in scam compounds across Southeast Asia, contributing to research and data collection on the matter, and advocating for affirmative action from governments and relevant public bodies through guidance and policy recommendations. Valentina, thank you for joining us from across the pond. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to our keynote speakers. So I'm Valentina Kasuli, Project Officer at Humanity Research Consultancy. We're a social enterprise based in the UK. We work with governments, NGOs, and the private sector to provide consultancy, training, and investigation services exploring supply chains and emerging forms of human trafficking. Since last year, we have witnessed a rise of a new form of human trafficking, and just to pre-warn, and there's a graphic image on the next slide. So we have witnessed the rise of a form of human trafficking whereby victims are lured into compounds across Southeast Asia, commonly in Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and the Philippines, and they are forced to scam others from across the globe. If they don't perform well or they refuse to comply, they'll often be beaten, electrocuted, or face other methods of torture, as you can see in this slide here. Victims are trafficked into the compounds. They come from a range of backgrounds. Many are educated English-speaking professionals, and we have identified victims from over 20 different countries since first discovering this crime. This includes countries such as Peru, Uganda, China, and Russia, and this is ever evolving. In fact, this map is already out of date. It's important to note that some do go voluntarily to conduct the scams, but once they're there, they face the same level of abuse and torture as the other victims who are forced to carry out the scams. Since we learned about this crime, we have helped over 70 survivors to exit the compounds, and we've worked heavily in advocacy and pushed for change from the governments in combating this crime. Victims are sold to the different companies that operate within the compounds and are often sold for upwards of $1,000. And there have also been reports of victims being sold with USDT, which is a digital currency. These are screenshots from open Telegram group chats, which anyone can join on their mobile or laptop. They're used to buy and sell human beings, put out bounties for people who've escaped from the compounds, and share scam scripts that are to be used by the people in the compounds to scam others, and tactics such as how to brainwash, how to build trust, manipulative conversation tactics for scamming female targets. Technology plays a key role in enabling this crime. Money from the scams is untraceable as a result of it being passed through blockchain. And there's also the use of AI and deep fake in the process of carrying out the scams. Within the compounds themselves, those conducting the scams are often given numerous mobile phones and computers to aid their activity. And then within the compounds, international internet cables are frequently used to evade detection and reroute locations, many of which are rerouted into Thailand from compounds in countries such as Myanmar and Cambodia. With this, technical literacy and capacity in digital forensics needs to be increased if we are to effectively collect digital evidence from the compounds and online, and also trace financial flows. And with that, there needs to be an understanding amongst lawyers and judges with regard to interpreting digital evidence and how this can be used in court to prosecute the criminals that are involved in this crime. At the moment, one of the most successful means of exit for the victims in the compounds is through intervention from their embassies, who have the power to demand the release of their citizens from the compounds. However, as Dan rightly pointed out, if victims do get out of the compounds, many are fined for expired visas, or they'll probably face criminal charges for the scamming activities they were forced to carry out within the compounds. This highlights the needs for increased understanding of forced criminality and the non-punishment principle, which aims to protect victims from being prosecuted for crimes that they had no choice but to commit as a result of their trafficking situation. An increased capacity for victim identification is needed within law enforcement so that victims can be correctly identified as such and be seen through the lens of the non-punishment principle. Diplomatic intervention is key to make it clear to the relevant authorities that their citizens have been victims of human trafficking and should be viewed as such. This crime is part of an expansive and sophisticated criminal network, as set out in the diagram here, involving actors at multiple levels. We've identified so far over 15 criminals operating as compound owners in Cambodia, many of which are known criminals wanted for their involvement in money laundering or drug trafficking and illegal gambling, and some have even been sanctioned. It's crucial that we see an increase in the prosecution of key actors within this criminal network, with collaboration from international law enforcement bodies to carry this out effectively, and also the seizing of assets of the criminals. Many of the criminals that operate within this criminal network live luxurious lifestyles abroad in countries such as Australia and the US. Source country trafficking groups are also low-hanging fruit that can be targeted to disrupt the system and the flow of victims from sending countries into the compounds. All relevant authorities and organizations involved in countering this crime should be aware of the structure in order to understand the different ways in which we can intervene and dismantle the network. The criminal network is transnational, and the information regarding this crime can be found through numerous informal and formal channels, such as social media, testimonies from victims in the compounds, and cases of prosecutions of key actors and criminals involved. Such information comes in multiple languages. And so far, with the Chinese expertise that we have in HRC, we've found the majority of the information to actually be in Mandarin Chinese. Increased information sharing is crucial, and regional governments should establish means of communication across the borders, such as signing legally binding MOUs, and cross-sector collaboration needs to be encouraged between law enforcement, governments, the tech and finance industry, survivors, NGOs, and even journalists. With such an ever-evolving crime, a dynamic approach is needed to keep up with the criminals who are constantly changing, but our actions are not fast enough to keep up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valentina, for that very revelatory presentation. You know, you've been head deep working on this issue for years, even though it is a rather new issue. For those tuning in and hearing about this for the first time, probably find the information very shocking. And rarely do we think about the other side of that text message that comes into our phone that says, you know, "Hi, Brian, do you want to go to the art gallery this afternoon?" Now, we know that that's a scam text message. Hopefully we're able to identify that, but rarely do we think that that's a victim on the other end who is likely being forced to send that at risk of punishment or physical harm. And so I think it's important for those to, everyone is experiencing this in some way, but to realize that much of this is coming out of the Mekong region is a first step in taking action to stem and mitigate these activities. We're going to hear next from someone who has also been head deep in this issue for a long time. And if you are interested in following the scam compound issue day to day, I recommend you following Mekdara on Twitter or the platform X, because he is one of the most intrepid and also I would say accurate and revealing persons watching this issue in Cambodia. And for his efforts, he just this year won the Trafficking in Human Persons Hero Award from the U.S. Department of State, as was presented to him by Secretary Antony Blinken in June. and he won this for his reporting on cyber scam slavery compounds in Cambodia. Mek Dara is a former reporter for the Cambodia Daily, the Phnom Penh Post, and the VOD, and he's currently freelancing. Dara, thank you for joining us from Phnom Penh. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, as Brian give introduction about myself, so I will make it quick and very short, because as you already know that I have done a lot of report about this syndicate business. So I just want to wrap up a little about the reason earlier this year. Recently, we have seen a lot of arresting, like in Malaysia, in Philippines, in Singapore, and also in Cambodia, in China also. So we have seen a lot, and this arresting is not really low profile. It's really high profile. Like the money could was million to billion. So we have seen that some authority is not turn a blind eye to this business. So they really go after them, and they really go to the money. They look into their bank, they pressing their banks. They would not let them, for bailing them. So we can see like this year seems to be a very rough year for the big scammer. So, and what I see is that like what I also learned that most big scammer, they are not staying like in Cambodia or in Myanmar or in Laos, but they are stay and reside in Singapore. Like they have tons, a collection of lavish drinks, like 3 cars. So mostly they have the subordinate in each country, in Cambodia, in Laos, in Myanmar, in Thailand, in Philippines. Like, like I think in May, early in mid-May, more than 1,000 have been rescued in Philippines. And there is more and more. And also like it's just like when authority go after them, it's too big. But if the authority seem to be okay with it, it's really hard. And yeah, and in Cambodia, it also surprised me because earlier this year, there is 2 cases. There is Japanese also. First case is 19 Japan have been arrested for related to scamming in Japan. And then later on, there is So when Japan is small, just I think this last month they have been extradited. So we have seen a lot of authority that go after, take very serious action against the scamming. But in some countries, they're still limited. They're still like not really much action have been taken against the scamming. So also, I just want to highlight a little about like regarding Cambodia. It is like now the situation, the scam is also after the government have take serious action to crack down. So all the people who work in the compound, they left the compound, they spread all over the country. They crossing the border to Laos, to Thailand, to Myanmar, to Philippines, Dubai, and other parts. And so after the government quiet, and now they starting to re-emerge. And it seems to be re-emerged in this time. It is more legalized. It means like if you have working permission, if you have like passport, you have everything. It could be you are legitimate to do the business. And now there is like every week you can see the Ministry Interior receive a phone call asking for help, and then like 3 or 4 cases, and the victim, we can say victim, between like 5 to 10 people every both the week, almost they have every week. So we can see that like it's still happening. And also what the explanation is that the authority explanation is that like they unhappy with their work. But the point like why they cannot leave the compound, they are unhappy with their work and they want to leave and they are in debt, so they have to pay. So this is the justification that authority give. There is some NGO said this is ridiculous. How can they list the compound? You know, this is the thing. So yeah, hopefully in the wrap up thing, I think hopefully through this outcome of the report, I think many NGO and the government in the region look into it and then take it seriously. Oh, I want to add more. Just a couple of weeks ago, I see the IOM work with the Cambodian police. They learn how to identify the victim. That is a good start. So at least they start to recognize the victim. They work on to you know, like turning the victim into the criminal, from a criminal to the victim. So this is a good start. So I think this is a good thing. And yeah, I think today the UN also released a report about this big industry, also how this involved. So I think I'm very surprised to see the UN started to look into this. So I think it is a starting point that we have seen that many big stakeholders, also including the US and other parts, start to look into, because they have seen that it's not only Chinese or other citizens that are falling the victim. Even the US citizen also fall into this victim. Many people from like London, from EU, yes, other part of the world that fall into this victim. So yeah, as long as we can go have the victim and as long as we can go after the money, I think the amount of the scam industry would be reduced. Yes, thank you so much for your pay attention.
Thank you, Dara, and thank you for your work on this issue, and please keep it up and be safe. You know, I think that's an important thing since you're there on the ground. Please be safe and be careful as you continue to work. A question for you though, as you mentioned rightfully that there have been a large increase in rescues of victims of the scam compounds. Are you seeing the compounds being shut down?
So yeah, I think was shockingly, we have during the raid, the government raid. So there are many big compounds. They left early before the raid, and then they raid to few compound, also big compound. They confiscate a lot of stuff like electric shock and many evidence on the ground. A lot of things like boron, electric prostitution, you know, torturing and other. But just a couple of months later, like the raid is happening in September, around September, and now like in 2013, yeah, it is like in now when I went back, it coming back in different names. Now like the one who are notoriously people know about it is Chinatown and Kaibo, and then now yeah they are back and other, but the amount of they coming back is small. It's still like 50% or 60%. It's not really full scale yet.
Great, thank you. And you know, one of the worries is even if one country prioritizes the closure and arrest and successful prosecution of the kingpins of these operations, it's quite simple for those individuals to move to other countries and set up their operations. And so there has, I think the data show that there's been a migration of this illicit activity to Laos and then to Myanmar particularly, as Cambodia does continue to prioritize enforcement of this issue. Thank you for joining us, Dara. We're going to move now to Ms. Nga Bui, who is joining us from Hanoi. Nga is Senior Program Officer for Traffic Vietnam. After graduating from university, Nga devoted herself to working in the field of social and environmental development. Joining the Traffic team in 2015, she's best known as a campaigner for demand reduction efforts tackling the consumption of flagship wildlife species in the country. She's been working for Traffic for 8 years, and she's really become a master and strong wildlife-driven stakeholder, a master of wildlife stakeholder management. She's got some strengths in social behavior change techniques, and we're going to hear about her work during her presentation. Thank you, Nga.
Yeah, so thank you, Brian. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone from Vietnam, whenever you are. So again, somebody in Hanoi, Vietnam, working for an INGO's named Traffic. We focus mainly on wildlife conservation. So I think that you all know that the illegal trades in wildlife in the world's largest crime sector, only after like drugs smuggling, counterfeiting, and human trafficking. And these new areas of criminalities has been searching in the past decades. And in response to that, donors, international donors, including the US government, have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on program or project saving endangered wildlife species. And countries in Mekong region, including Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, or Myanmar, are also considered at the consumption market for those products. And the local government in those countries are showing a very strong political will in order to combat wildlife crime. And a lot of campaigns, activities happen in those countries also in order to make sure that we can reduce the demands and then increase the effectiveness of all the activities. However, in this country, there are still a lot of loopholes obstructing the efforts. For example, the ineffectiveness of the legal framework, the weak law enforcement, limited collaboration and data sharing, and also low level of awareness and a very slow in the chain of practice of wildlife consumer. So the SIG policy dialogues, how in May already how to gather a group of wildlife experts and how to identify some priority issues as well as very good recommendations that are very helpful for all other organizations and individuals in the world to improve the wildlife trafficking efforts in the coming futures. So after the dialogue, there are 3 key takeaways that I really want to highlight today in our launch. The first thing is that how we can really actually reduce the demand of consumers. So efforts to demand reduction must tackle and respond to the very long-rooted traditional beliefs that drive the local consumption. Here I mean, for example, traditional medicines. In the opening remark, we listened and we hear about traditional medicine. Like take Vietnam, for example. In Vietnam, the 4,000 years of traditional medicine make it very, very difficult for us in order to change the belief and the activity of the patient and the people in society in using rhino horn or tiger bone crew for healthcare products. You cannot change it overnight, is it for sure? So in response to that, more scientific evidence on the healthcare functionalities of those products must be given to change the attitudes and also the behaviors of the patient. Educating the young generation, including the future TM practitioner, is also very important to redirect the use of legal, safe, and sustainable traditional medicine ingredients and remedies in the society. And further than that, promoting like modern alternative option is also a very good approach for us to go. The second thing, another aspect that I want to mention is about cultural influence. Coming back to Vietnam, so in Vietnam now we are in the goat month, the lunar month of the lunar years, and in this month, people believe that it is the time that the goat or the dead people are released. And in this month, we have the Vu Lan Festival, or people can call it like Wandering Showers Day. And in this special, it is a very important spiritual holiday in Vietnam and other Asian countries, I believe so. So in this area, people often do a lot of merit release. So apart from very normal or farm animal like fish, snail, or frog, a lot of bird species are being released also. And a recent or latest traffic consumer survey in Vietnam also found out that there are a group of female Vietnamese people who are even buying like the freshwater turtle and tortoise, including the protected species, and they do it for merit release. the second point that I really want to mention, it relates to the crimes detection, arrest, and prosecution. And it relates to the collaboration of a group of enforcement agencies in all countries, custom, environmental police, and also prosecutor. The key thing is that the numbers of arrests resulting in prosecution is very limited until the kingpin of the criminal network is not arrested. Then even though we witness the increasing numbers of seizure, but seizure is not enough in order to disrupt the illegal wildlife trade chains, or it also not enough to threaten the criminals, then we can see that it still happen. The third point that I really want to mention is we need to have a very comprehensive efforts. It means demand reduction efforts alone cannot work. Demand reduction should be complemented with the strengthening of the policy, revision of the legal framework, and also the enhancement of law enforcement. It's been associated with the increasing of the capacity buildings and skills of enforcement staff, and also very important that we increase the collaboration, data and intelligence sharing, not only at local level, but very important at regional levels, because only when we do that, we can try to detect and then arrest the cross-border wildlife trafficking criminal network. So those are the three important things that I really want to highlight. However, besides that, there are some like cross-cutting problems that also affect the effectiveness of all the efforts of many agencies and all the local governments. And some of them also include corruption. Addressing the corruption wildlife trafficking nexus still has a long way to go, but some measures or steps that the local government can take, for example, they can enforce like stricter anti-corruption regulation, or even like increase the salary for the public officials, giving or providing more state budgets for any corruption, anti-corruption work, giving more like initiative, giving prize or something like that, in order to make people to stop corruption or reports on corruption. Another point that there are a lot of different group of consumer in society. For example, traditional medicine, a lot of, we don't know, anyone in the society can be the patient and can be the user of rhino horn or tiger barn cruise. So public engagement is very important, and it can help us to create a stronger social mobilization. And from that, it can help us to establish a social norm that wildlife consumption will gradually be socially unaccepted. And if this happens, people will actively stop the wrong behaviors. And they don't do that because they think that they are the only one who do that. And the rest of the world will protect that. The last one already mentioned from the Valentina presentation on human trafficking, and the same in wildlife trafficking. We're talking about technology. Technology is very powerful. So for wildlife conservation, we should to explore further the power of high technology advance in order to transform wildlife conservation activities to make it to the best of effectiveness, and can help us to really tackle the roots of the issues. So I think that's all for the wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Na, and thank you for mentioning the corruption issue, because certainly corrupt activities are pervasive throughout the governments of the Mekong region in facilitating and increasing the level of activity. To discuss corruption further, we've invited Cynthia Gabriel, who is Senior Anti-Corruption Advisor at the Center for International Private Enterprise site, which I have to note is a neighbor of the Stimson Center here in Washington, just one floor below us. Cynthia is calling in not from Washington, D.C., but from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. She is the founding director of the Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism and a key advocate of human rights and good governance in Malaysia. She has degrees in both science and law and brings 2 decades of experience to governance, the rule of law, and anti-corruption knowledge. In 2022, Cynthia was conferred the Global Anti-Corruption Champion Award by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Cynthia, thank you for joining us. Again, it was great to meet you at the conference in May. We look forward to hearing your presentation and remarks.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much to the Stimson Center for inviting me to say a couple of things. Thank you, Brian, for very good moderation. I just wanted to start by consolidating what all the previous speakers have actually been speaking about, that transnational crime is really a threat to human security, to humanity, and very much to national security. A lot of the things that were mentioned just now are actually fueled by corruption. So whether we're talking about drug trafficking, human trafficking, illegal logging, environmental crimes, etc., much of the transnational crime are actually organized criminal activity. And so we're dealing with something which is very complex. And we also know that criminal networks have actually advanced so much from the conference in May and in many other platforms. We know that criminal networks have actually taken advantage of the open system, the open economic globalized system that's at work now to actually profiteer from much of what we are suffering today. So I think when we're talking about all these things that have been spoken about by the previous speakers, I wanted to say that from the journalist perspective, one of the most difficult things about investigation and about trying to piece pieces together when it comes to transnational networks is really about getting data that is legitimate. Because a lot of it is in the shadow economy, a lot of it is illicit and contributes to illicit finance, that it becomes really, really very complex to actually piece a whole map together. So with that regard, I think the first thing that we should talk about, apart from identifying the problems, is the recommendation for how we can actually strengthen law enforcement. Mekong region, definitely very vulnerable because we're talking about many countries within the Mekong that actually have a weak rule of law system in place. We're talking about democracies which are in transition. We're talking about closed societies, and we're even talking about communist states, one which is actually one being manned by military, etc., etc. So when it comes to weak rule of law, there's also weak check and balance and weak system. So I think this is where corruption festers. And one of the main areas that we need to look at, apart from political will, is how do we actually get the law enforcement to work better for our interests. So what are we talking about? Like, for example, in Malaysia, when the 1MDB scandal became a global phenomenon and contributed to one of the largest financial heists of current times, one of the immediate things that happened with the change of government was coming together of intelligence, law enforcement networks to actually share data, to actually look at how connected data can actually tap and map how the money actually moves, and how we can actually look at trying to return stolen assets back to the origin of where it was stolen from. So it's very complicated, but this is something I'm hoping that the 1.5 State Department dialogue can actually lead us towards, because Department of Justice is a very key component in actually helping law enforcement agencies to move forward. So quite quickly, in also talking about why we need to actually tackle transnational organized crime, is because it isn't just something that penetrates where the rule of law is weak, but it also increasingly, through Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, etc., have shown us that state involvement have become more and more rampant in the whole issue of working with organized criminals. And so how do we actually deal with those issues, which are very complex? And it also includes stakeholders like high-level businessmen, and that really becomes a threat to the rule of law, democracy, and all the different democratic institutions, including the judiciary. So I think in the last few lines of what I wanted to say here is that we're all probably convinced that corruption fuels transnational organized crime. But how do we move from where we are today to where we want to go? And the next steps over how we can actually strengthen the rule of law, strengthen democracy, and strengthen dialogue and engagement with difficult states. Why it's really important for transnational organized crime to be tackled so that real economies and markets don't get disadvantaged, and that the illegitimate markets are actually posing a threat to competitiveness of legitimate markets, for example. So it's bad for business, and business and economies and business players also need to actually probably play a very important role in strengthening where the rule of law can actually work to promote legitimate economies and to actually kill off transnational crime by being in concert in actually adopting corporate governance values and actually saying no to bribes and trying to do away with shortcuts and finding connections to profiteer instead of actually looking at long-term gains for the economy, etc. So I think one of the things that perhaps the Stimson Center can look forward in going forward is actually how to engage the private sector, how to engage law enforcement, because I do know that the UNODC has started a very interesting initiative called the Globe Network that has brought a couple of very, I think there's more than 100 law enforcement agencies, anti-corruption commissions as well, into a platform with the objective of actually sharing data and intelligence, etc. But there is no real focus on transnational crimes or cyber crimes, but it's about corruption in general, trying to look at how to solve grand corruption cases that are cross-border, which are transnational, and which actually perhaps deal with issues of financial and security sectors, financial crimes, money laundering, etc. So we're dealing with a lot of complicated issues here, but I think we can take it step by step and to look at which would be priority areas that we want to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. And for those of you tuning in, if you found these 4 presentations enlightening and informative, and you feel the energy of the folks that are working on these issues and the dedication that they have, imagine what 60 similar individuals coming together for 2 days, what kind of discourse and energy they can bring to that conversation. It was an extremely informative 2 days together. And I think also one of the benefits of having a conference like this is that there's an opportunity to learn fresh ideas and also have kind of a cathartic experience, because what our presenters today and our participants work on is, it's an extremely stressful, horrifying set of issues for many of them. And I think we all found some comfort and solace in being together in Bangkok for a few days to share and to network and to get to know each other. So we're going to turn now. First, before we turn to Q&A, I have to thank 2 people who are calling in as attendees. One is Alana Bala, who was the intern for the Stimson Center Southeast Asia program during this conference, and she really put a lot of energy into helping our team pull off a successful conference. Alana, it's great to see you here in the audience. And then the other is Matt Killian from INL here in Washington, D.C. Matt was responsible for corralling many and all of the U.S. government participants, and also energizing and coordinating the discussion and efforts of those U.S. government participants who attended the conference. Matt, thank you for calling in, and thank you for your efforts. Let's go to our questions. We've got some really good questions out there. A number of them are from journalists. Right off the bat, we've got a question from Nirmal Ghosh from the Straits Times about arrest and prosecution. So he says, if the owners and controllers of some of these criminal groups are living in places like Australia and the US, and I think the point is outside of the Mekong region, what stops them from being disrupted? Is there a record of successful arrests and prosecution? To kind of interpret this question, are the rest increasing of owners and controllers of some of these criminal networks? That question is to anyone.
I think I'll just quickly jump in. Thank you for that question. Very, very good question. I think when it comes to the kingpin owners, we're seeing a slight increase. The increase is more on the trafficking groups that are operating in relation to this crime. So Taiwan especially has been particularly proactive. Towards the end of last year, they prosecuted close to 300 traffickers that were operating in Taiwan, sending people to the compounds in Cambodia. And the members of the United Bamboo Gang, which is a notorious gang operating in Taiwan, which is involved with the trafficking of Taiwanese people to Cambodia, were found guilty, and one of the members was sentenced to up to 18 years in prison. I'll send through some links as well. As for the kingpin key actors, we know that Shi Zhejiang is facing extradition back to China at the moment. He was arrested in Thailand early this year at the airport. But I think that's a question that we all want to know the answer to. How are these criminals able to live so freely? I know that one criminal operates businesses in Australia and has houses there and cars, and he's suspected by the Australian police of involvement in drug trafficking, but they don't have the adequate evidence to actually prosecute. So yeah, if anyone else wants to add anything, I'll send through some article links as well.
Yeah, I just want to add very quick. So yeah, I think a couple of days ago, there is one raid. They arrested more than about 10 people in Singapore. I just have said earlier. And for them, I think they have a Cambodian citizenship, but they are from China. So like they also own like some company in here too. So there is can be looked into this. So what I have mentioned, it is earlier, like mostly the Pinkin or the big boss, the behind the show. Mostly they don't live in the country that are doing the scam. They are sitting watching from behind how the business is going. So, and mostly they are live in a very wealthy country. And their cash is very super rich. Yes.
Thanks, Dara.
And it's very, very hard to go after them. Yes. As long as there is a strong commitment from the authority to go after the big boss.
Thank you, Dara. I'm going to go to another question. This one is from Kang Dung from the Ho Chi Minh City Law newspaper in Vietnam. Kang Dung asks a question about diplomacy. So this is more about development partners and donor governments and diplomacy. So given the rising instances of cyber-enabled crime, how are diplomatic efforts acting to strengthen cybersecurity measures and promote information sharing among Mekong nations? And how will diplomatic channels be utilized, or how are they utilized to enhance coordination among countries in addressing these issues, particularly when perpetrators operate across borders? Anyone can answer that one. If we don't have a good answer, that's fine, we can move on, but feel free to answer that one.
I can add very quick. So because I have learned this, so mostly there is pointing the finger at each other. So like a couple incident that happened, like Cambodia pointing finger at Indonesia, pointing finger at Taiwan, pointing finger at Philippines, while the Philippines pointing finger at Cambodia, Thailand point finger at Cambodia pointing finger at Thailand. So there is backlash. So like, okay, recently like Indonesia said there is I think 19 Indonesia have been like come to Cambodia, and then they do the kidney surgery, and Cambodia say nope, We don't have that. so there is a lot of backfire. There is no and then if there is international news say, oh, there is scam in Cambodia. Cambodia said, no, there is no scam. There is no detention. There is no confinement. Prove it. So there is we that is the thing, like, so that's why they it's really hard for the diplomat sometimes working if they really go pointing the finger, there's something bad happen, they just stand up say, no, this not happen. There's many cases that happen like this, and it sometimes it's very, for the embassy, I think for embassy like Taiwan, very hard to work with because Taiwan doesn't have a embassy in Cambodia. So it's very, very hard for people to, like, when they got arrested, how to help them, So it's really tough for the people who have no embassy in Cambodia too. So it's really hard to fight to get them out too. When they have the people, when they have embassy, like said earlier, you find very easy to get out, but you end up in the immigration, you have to pay the fine, and stuck in immigration center is very horrible, like prison. It's not different from the prison, sometimes it could be worse. So you need to there are a lot of things need to look into to have to dig into this, and it requires a lot of work and commitment.
Thank you, Dar. No, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add in, ASEAN network can be a very good platform for us to invest further. I believe that they are promoting this kind of things, but the thing that we really want to do is that's to promote it and make it more active, and then we can gain like very good result. Another example also come from China and Vietnam, because the two countries are the key consumers market for wildlife trafficking. So Vietnamese custom and Chinese custom, they already developed a kind of, they call Mekong Dragon Initiative for data sharing and intelligence sharing, and via this platform a lot of intelligence information has been provided to two parties, and then they can disrupt a lot of cross-border Vietnam and China wildlife trafficking. So some example like this which can be replicated in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Na. Cynthia, on corruption, do you see any effective cross-border efforts from ASEAN countries or Mekong countries themselves, governments themselves, and then from donor governments? Any thoughts, comments? You're muted, Cynthia.
On the anti-corruption front, there's a couple of initiatives being explored now on international cooperation between governments. So one of the interesting next steps is the Conference of State Parties of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. So this is where there is a review of member states' commitments with regard to the standards being imposed in there. And for the record, all 10 Southeast Asian countries have actually become members and have ratified the UNCAC. So there is an obligation to meet. And the third chapter talks about international cooperation. The fifth chapter talks about recovery of stolen assets. So it's a lot of the things that we're talking about here are going to be discussed in Atlanta in December at the conference, at the 10th Conference of State Parties. So I think one of the stress around corruption is that it's no longer how we used to understand it before, but it has become so sophisticated. It has become so complex that the state parties need to actually agree that there needs to be more cross-border enhancement when it comes to looking at tackling corruption across borders. Because once it enters into that space where domestic jurisdictions are not actually going to be able to catch the criminals, that's where they actually get the chance to run away. And in the case of Malaysia and a few other countries that I know, there actually are culprits, perpetrator countries that actually protect those that run away after committing a particular crime. So we actually need to bring these so-called problematic countries into the fold as well to discuss why it becomes a threat to legitimate economies. I think on the other front is about evidence and data collection. I noticed that a lot of the questions in the Q&A box are asking for real numbers and cases. So if we are alluding to weak law enforcement, we should be able to actually justify that with numbers, that there are real police personnel involved in taking bribes or border patrol police involved in taking bribes. On the Malaysian side, we have compiled a couple of cases. I'm not an expert on the Mekong side, but I'm sure there are investigative groups that do similar kind of work. So it is really about collecting the data, and when it's the right time, it might be important to even name and shame. But the whole point here is to actually be as evidence-based as possible in actually talking about why this data now needs to be addressed with certain anti-corruption measures. And when it comes to what Vietnam is talking about, like wildlife trafficking or even environmental crimes, that you cannot replace that forest that you have cut down for profits. What then do you do to actually ensure that there's accountability to the system? So it's good to have domestic laws, but it's really important to have it enforced. And so that is why it is actually very necessary that the domestic jurisdictions must come together to look at how to tackle cross-border situations. But in that regard, I think access to information laws will really empower journalists and civil society groups to actually do a lot more of the work to detect fraud, illicit activity, and corruption. So it's a multiple process, but I think we really need to look at becoming more evidence-based. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Folks, and those of you joining in, we've hit our hour, and we're going to move to close this discussion. Again, this was the conference itself was such an enlightening experience, a revealing experience for those who attended. And the result of your efforts, those who attended and participated, are all collected within this policy report that we are launching today. And that is a summary report of policy recommendations and the most pressing issues within this issue area of trafficking and cyber-enabled crime. I encourage all of you tuning in to read this report. By my look at it, I think this is the best one that we produced out of the 6 that we produced so far, and the quality of it is, again, a testimony to the work that people like Cynthia, Dara, and Valentina are doing. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us today, Cynthia, Dara, and Valentina. Keep up this work. Don't stop. You're driving change. You're creating impacts daily in these spaces that you're working in. But it's also important to remember to be safe. And I wish you all the best, and thank you for joining us. Everyone else, thanks for joining in. This has been a really productive discussion, and we look forward to seeing you again at the launch of our 7th Policy Dialogue report on transboundary water governance. And that conference was held in July and also in Bangkok. And it was equally good. So we look forward to seeing that conference was in Chiang Rai, Thailand, not in Bangkok. We look forward to seeing the readout and results of that conference experience. Thanks everyone for joining in. Take good care and be safe.